Hi, it's Prof. Brian. In this video, I'm going to show you the mechanics of making a Hebrew clause layout and translation in Microsoft Word. The same principles would hold if you were using a different word processor, but some of the specific steps might vary. The basic issues with making our clause layout for narrative is that we want our preterites out to the margin, and then we want to indent things that are subordinate or that are reported speech. We'll go over the specific driving principles at the end. Right now we're just focused on the mechanics of trying to save time in putting this together. So you can see in the template that I've already got a table here. You can create tables in Word by selecting Insert Table from the Table menu, and that will give you the opportunity to decide how many columns and how many rows that you want. But you can always add rows just by going to the end of a table and hitting Tab, and you just get more rows. Okay, and in cases where the Hebrew verses and the English verses are different, then we want to have two center columns that have the verse numbers that go with the proper language. Make sure your center columns are nice and narrow so that they're not taking up a bunch of space. Okay, you might go into one of your electronic resources and copy and paste your Hebrew text. It'll come to you then in a Unicode format that's reading right to left. Sometimes you can copy the text with text critical notations included, but having those English letters in the middle of your Hebrew sometimes will create problems when you're copying and pasting sections of the text. So I tend to recommend that you go ahead and take a version of the text that does not have TC notation so that you've primarily just got Hebrew there to deal with. Okay, I've taken a small section of Jonah to use as our sample and pasted it down here. And what we want to do is have the easiest process possible going from here to the table. And what we don't want to do is come into each verse and decide how much do we want to copy that, go up to our table, paste it in, go back to our text, copy another section, go back to our table, paste it in. That's really time consuming. So there's another procedure that we can do that will get us most of the way there and then let us focus on the important decision making as a second step. So I'm going to turn on the paragraph marks so that we can see some of the things that we're doing. And the first thing I'm going to do is insert a tab in between the verse reference and the Hebrew. Now, given where the tabs are set at the moment, it's not moving the text over that much, and that's fine because it's not really for us so much as it is for the computer. We're telling the computer that there's basically two columns now. Well, there's a column on each side of that tab. And when we start making clauses, we're just going to keep it in this format and separate by tabs. And then when we convert it into a table, the computer program will understand it as the tabs dividing columns. So for example, there's only one verb. We want to go one clause at a time. There's only one verb in verse 1, so we've got nothing more to do there. But we come to Jonah 1:2 and we see kum. We see, oh, well, that's a verb. Kum lake, that's another verb. We'll talk about some different decisions that can be made here, but just to show the mechanics again, we're going to hit return and then we're going to hit tab. And now we're going to see that tab visually, and we don't care whether or not it's lined up right now. For all we care about is that there is a tab, and so the program will keep track of each side of the tab. So then we have a verb here, and we go, and then we see ukara, we see another verb, so we're going to hit return and tab. And then we see key, which is a conjunction. We're going to hit return and tab. So we have set these verses up so that we've got a right side and a left side to the tab. Those will become columns. And another thing that I want to advise you on is, like, we don't have to be super precise our first time through with the Hebrew text. I mean, we're still learning to read Hebrew. And there are some things we can do to speed us along our way as long as we give ourselves permission to make more corrections later. One of those things is paying attention to the accent marks. So let me just remind you, there are certain major pausal accents or disjunctive accents. The two that we learned first were the saluk with sof pasuk at the end of every verse and the atnak, which is at the middle, conceptual middle of almost every verse in the Bible. And then there are some other heavy accents. Zakef parvum, Zakef magnum, revia, and segolta are the ones that we see the most often. You might say to yourself, these look a little bit like vowels above the line. That's how we've talked about them sometimes before. I mean, a segolta looks like an upside down segol, but above the line. A revia, okay, this is square, not a dot, but it kind of looks like a hirik above the line. A zakef looks like a shava, but above the line. And a zakef magnum looks like, kind of, a composite shava above the line. So when you're seeing lots and lots of different accent marks that we don't have to learn how to name at this point in time, these are the ones that you want to pay the most attention to and ignore all the rest. Right? So saluk and sof pasuk and atnak that we've seen a lot, and then a few more that kind of look like vowels but are above the line. So let's go back to our text of Jonah. And if we're going along, so we're looking for those heavy accents, but also especially when those heavy accents are followed by a conjunction, because conjunctions are usually separating clauses. So we have Vayakom Yona Livroach Tarshisha, and we see, right, there's one of those marks on Tarshisha, but it's not followed by a conjunction, right? This is a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase on its own is not going to get a line, but we see the atnak here. And the atnak is followed by a conjunction. So even without translating the previous, we can just say, oh, atnak followed by a conjunction, hit return and tab. And then we might miss this one. So we're going to pretend that we missed this one. We see that this is a preterite. We know it should have its own clause, but it wasn't read with as big of a break as some of the others. And so we hear it's Tarshisha with a revia, and it's followed by a conjunction. So we're just going to hit return tab again. And then let's say we miss this one. I'm mentioning that because we can fix it later. Right now, we're just trying to do fast work. And this goes all the way. Tarshisha has a zakef now, but it's not followed by a conjunction. It's followed by a preposition, so we wouldn't separate it. Jonah 1:4, we see there's a revia on the Lord's name, but we're not going to have a one-word clause. So this is, still good advice if you're a cantor, but right now we're working on a different task. So we go up to the next heavy accent, and there's a zakef, and it's followed by a conjunction. So we're going to just hit return and tab, and then here's an atnak, and it's followed by a conjunction. So we're going to hit return and tab. Here's a zakef, it's not followed by a conjunction. We're going to keep going. So here's a preterite, and then here's a revia, and it is followed by a conjunction. So return tab, you get the idea. Here's a segolta, followed by a conjunction, return tab. Here we see a share, and even though there's not a heavy accent mark here, whenever we see a share or key or conjunctions like that, we're just going to hit return tab. Here's a zakef, heavy accent. It's not followed by a conjunction. We'll skip over it. Here's our atnak. It's followed by a conjunction, return tab. Here's a revia, but it's only a single word, so we're just going to keep going. Here is a zakef. It's followed by a conjunction, so we hit return tab. And this time I'm going to say I don't miss it. I see that this word is another preterite, so even though the previous word doesn't have a heavy accent mark, I'm hitting return tab. So maybe you think this is getting a little tedious at this point, but I assure you we are saving time. Here is zakef followed by conjunction, return tab. Vayomer should catch our attention because it's introducing speech, and so even if there's not a heavy accent, Vayomer lo, he said to him, ma is an interrogative. I'll hit return tab. At least I tried to. And then here is an atnak. It's not followed by a conjunction, but it is followed by a verb, so return and tab. Zakef followed by a conjunction, return and tab. And then this one I'll say I'm not going to miss. I see velo novade, so I know I've got a verb there and a clause. Maybe this is enough to use as an example for the moment. So there's 6 verses. It filled up a page. And so I'm going to come and click here, and I'm going to select all of these lines. And let's see, I need to come down here and grab the end of verse 6 there. Once I've done that, I'm going to come to table and go to convert text to table, and make sure that it's separating the text at tabs. It says 2 columns. That's because it is counting how many tabs do you have in there. If you have 1 tab in there, then you've got stuff on each side, so 2 columns. If this shows for you number of columns 3, then that means somewhere you put in 2 tabs or forgot to hit return or something. So this can be a little bit of a check for you before you convert things. It should be 2 columns and dividing at tabs. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now it has made a table where I've got all my Hebrew in one column, and I've got all my verse references over here in another column. Now, since we need to label every line, you can just kind of copy and paste those references into the next lines. It doesn't take a lot of time. I'm going to just go ahead and do it, and then we'll have a chance to model some other things later. Whoops, I forgot to copy the new verse number here, and so I was pasting in the wrong verse number, and that'll come here and here. In order to save space, we're not going to want to repeat the name Jonah all the time. So now I'm going to do a change command, and I know it is Command-Shift-H on my Mac, and I'm just not spotting where to do it from the pull-down menu, so I'm just going to hit Command-Shift-H. You see I've got find and replace over here, and I'm going to put in Jonah and a space, and then I'm going to make sure there's nothing here. I put my cursor in and I hit delete just in case I accidentally had a space in there. If I click on this, I get my advanced find and replace, and so in those situations you can add more parameters. And I wanted to make sure it was only searching down, so it's only going to take out Jonah in the section that I have selected, and then I'm going to hit replace all. Great. And then some of these have a space with them, so I'm choosing not to do the rest of the document. So for that column only, I have a space in there. So for that column only, I have a space in there, and I'm going to do the same thing, and it just got rid of all those spaces for me, and I don't want to keep going through the rest of the document. Now I want my Hebrew to be in my template table up here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy the template. I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna paste it in. And I want to get this into here, and Microsoft Word has this issue. If I select the entire column, it's not going to paste in the way I want. So I need to come down here to the end and hit Tab until it gives me an extra row that I'm not going to use. Now I've got the cursor in the second to the last, excuse me, and I'll come up to the top, I'll copy all of that text, and now I'll come into my template and paste. And it kept the formatting that was previously in the table. So if you reuse an old table, it might keep the formatting from your previous text, and you'll have to mess with that. So you can do that by selecting the whole column and then selecting where the margins are over here, and it'll reset it all. Then you need to make, it looks like I need to do the same thing over here, make sure my margins are all the way to the left. Then you'll need to make your translation and make your decisions about indentation or lack thereof. So here we have, we're starting to make some decisions about what we're going to indent and why. In this case, I need to get rid of that. And I'm reminded, hey, I want to save time with all my verse references. I come here and I copy all my verse references from this column and I paste them in here, and then it's bigger than I want. So, you do the regular things. You pick a font, you pick a font size, and a color and all of that sort of thing. You make it look the way you want. And then you'll add the letters, right? So there's 4 lines of verse 2. So we're going to add A, B, C, D, and we'll do that for all the verses. I won't do all the mechanics of that at the moment. And there's a couple ways you can do indentation. Like here we have a quotation. You can come up and drag the parameters, the margin parameters. I'm not sure why this line didn't go as well. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, I'm just checking something about margins. The other way to do it is to use your tabs. So you put your cursor in here, and at least on a Mac, you have to hit Option tab in order for it to indent. And you can see that it didn't move much. So that means I need to establish the tabs. And because Hebrew is going right to left and Microsoft Word is thinking left to right, you do it on the opposite side of the ruler than you expect. If you don't have the ruler normally showing, you do that from the View menu up here, and you select Ruler so that you can just click in here to set your tab lengths. Here at Key, right, this is the reason he's supposed to cry out against it, the city. And so we're going to indent Key an extra level because we've indented all of these for being a quotation, and then we're indenting one more level because the key clause gives the reason for these volitional clauses. And then we start making our translation and making more decisions. So we're going to just look at a little bit of theory really quick. This is kind of based on discourse analysis. Robert Longacre is a linguist who tried to classify different types of discourse based on 3 parameters. Later he added a 4th. We're just going to look at these 3 briefly. One is contingent temporal succession. Is your text trying to talk about, what is, regardless of sequence, like it's just describing status, or is it telling a story or projecting the future where the major point of the type of literature is that we are moving forward in time rather than describing a static situation. Narratives are agent-oriented. In other words, most of the subjects of our verbs are about people. And it is characterized, narrative is characterized as negative projection. I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself here. Projection is whether or not for Longacre, whether or not the events are in the past or whether they are in the future, and whether or not they are volitional. So if we're giving instructions, we're projecting ahead to when the instructions might be fulfilled. This is like a super basic, imprecise way of talking about it. Now, in the way I handle it, we're going to modify this category of projection so that it does not include both time and mood or modality. So we would talk about historical narrative as being plus for contingent temporal succession. It's very important that we're moving through time. Plus for being agent oriented. And, it would be negative projection in Longacre's terms, but we're going to say that it's set in past time and narrative is giving us indicative mode. So when you identify for whatever type of literature you have, what its discourse parameters are, those parameters tell you what the main line of clauses are. So for whatever that type of literature, those come out to the margin, and then we indent things that are grammatically dependent, logically supportive, or otherwise ancillary. Of course, we also indent reported speech. We indent that all as a block, and then we have to do indentation within the reported speech to show the relationships going on for those clauses. Now, in Hebrew, we move the past timeline along with preterites. English doesn't have a special form for it, and preterites occasionally do some other jobs, but for the most part, preterites are saying, and then this is what happened next. So we're going to bring all our preterites out to the margin. Occasionally, a non-preterite construction that begins a paragraph, like, the noun first, and then you have a perfect verb instead of a preterite verb. Sometimes those are parenthetic remarks, but sometimes they are starting a paragraph. And if they're serving that role of advancing the timeline, and it is the sort of clause that the following preterites all depend on, then it's at that same main level, even though it's not a preterite. Occasionally, a vehene clause does this. You can't put hene in front of a preterite, but you can still move the timeline forward as well as draw attention to that clause with hene. So, yes, all the preterites go out to the margin, but no, it's not only preterites that go out to the margin, even though it's, mostly preterites that go out to the margin. Then we're also looking for the sections of the story, even as we do our clause layout. And we base that on grammatical, syntactical, and literary criteria. So we want to think of the story sort of like stage plays. They're made up of acts, and those are made up of scenes, and those are made up of paragraphs, and those are made up of clauses. Those things we're probably pretty familiar with, but there's another level in between paragraph and scene. And if we're writing a screenplay, we might call it a beat. Right, we have beats that are made up of paragraphs, and those beats comprise scenes. And because it's an odd term, we'll just call these steps in the story. And these major steps in the story consist of paragraphs that usually have an exchange. In other words, there's a stimulus and response. It might be one person speaks and then another person speaks. Somebody speaks and then someone does an action in response. Somebody does an action and someone else responds by speaking. Or it's an action followed by an action as a response. So when we move from our clause layout to our plot chart, the columns in our plot chart are going to be these beats, right? A couple of paragraphs that involve some sort of exchange, and together they're moving the storyline along. Now, as we look for those, let's just note the paragraphs often start with vayihi, or a temporal infinitive. Often that'll be with vayihi, but it can also be with, say, a perfect. Or non-preterite clauses. Here we just mean not verb first, because, as we just said, sometimes those are parenthetic remarks, but sometimes those are the beginnings of paragraphs. Paragraphs are also signaled by a change in time, place, or characters. These are literary criteria. Or dialogue segments. I tend to treat every reported speech item as a paragraph. But if you have one person speak, followed by another person speaking, that'll be two paragraphs, and if they're responding to each other, then the two things together make up a beat or a major step in the story. So when we come back to our clause layout, we're going to be looking for those exchanges. So let's look here briefly. We have God speaks, and then Vayakom Yona Livroach Tarshisha Melifne Adonai. So Jonah is now doing an action in response. So this is a new paragraph, but it's not a new beat. And then we get the description. He went down to Joppa and he found a ship. Oh, now I see that I've got an extra verb in here. Remember we said we're going to see it and pretend that we missed it? Because there wasn't a big heavy accent. So I'm just going to select this whole row of my table and hit copy and paste. Now I've got the line in there twice, and so then I can just hit delete for that part. And then I can select here, and it is easier to do when you've got all the spaces in between words showing. You can see whether you got it correct or not. I mean, whether you grabbed it. And so now I've got the adjustment that I needed to make, and that's just a lot easier than feeling like you have to get everything perfect the first time and you're just copying from your electronic Bible and going clause by clause trying to put it into the table. Then here, so he found a ship going to Tarshish, and he gave its fare, he paid the fare, and then Vayered, I've got another preterite, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit copy and paste, got that line in there twice now, and I'm going to delete the clause in that one, and I'm going to delete the clause here, and you can see I didn't grab the space well, so I'm just going to make sure I get rid of that. So we have Jonah, here's our subject. He got up, he went down to Joppa, he found the ship, he paid the fare, he got into the boat. And then we have one of these noun first constructions where the Lord is the subject and we have a perfect verb, and we're switching to what the Lord does in bringing up the storm. And you could say, well, isn't the Lord responding to Jonah's disobedience? He is, yes. But still, we're going to call this is our most immediate, this is our most immediate exchange. That's a beat in the story because God's going to send the storm and then people are going to react to the storm. So the reactions that are all tied together with the storm are the ones we want to keep together in that beat. And then, I should show you. Here in table, you can choose to hide the grid lines. And then under table design, you can choose, and I'm going to want, say, a double line, and I'm going to pick inside horizontal border here, and I'm going to show my division between the beats of the story with a heavier line. Another way to do it is to just insert a blank line in between your beats. Or another way to do it even is to put a blank line between the beats and then put, say, a single line in between paragraphs. All right, so we're giving ourselves some visual clues in terms of mapping the major pieces of the story. So this, even though it's not a preterite, since it starts a paragraph, I'm going to leave it out to the margin. Vayihi sa'ar gadol bayam, is a preterite. And then we have not a preterite. And we aren't starting a new paragraph here. So we would go ahead and hit Option Tab, and we would, whoops, I have this in the wrong place. And then we would indent that, or at least we're trying to. Okay, so something is being a little odd here, and I would have to check that. And then I've got a preterite and a preterite and a preterite and then a share clause. So I'm going to hit Option Tab here. And then I have Vayona Yarad El Yarkite Hasafina. And we've got a similar thing going on with, even though it's noun first, it's still going to be out to the margin because it's starting a paragraph. Now, there'll be another place to check your work, so I'm not going to do the whole thing of Jonah 1 now. but I'm trying to show you the mechanics of what we're doing in Microsoft Word to make this a faster process just for moving text around and making sure that it looks right and displays properly. You can always come back and turn off your paragraph marks so it looks a little bit cleaner to the eye. You need to make your translation, and you want to be following the principles of preterites out to the right, other things that move the storyline along, even if they're not preterites, out to the right, especially if it's beginning a paragraph. Subordinate grammatically or subordinate logically or reported speech all gets at least one level of indentation, sometimes more levels of indentation because they're supporting something that you've already indented in relationship to something else. Okay, I hope that going over the mechanics of this will save you time with your homework. Give it a try.